Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're the show that digs into complex information to pull out the insights that matter, especially for you, our curious listener. Today, we're tackling something. Well, it's a real paradox shaping the future of business. You've got this immense hype, billions pouring into artificial intelligence. But then you look at the project failure rates, and they're just astonishingly high. It's a disconnect that really opens your eyes. So, we're going to unpack why so many AI initiatives seem to stumble. And importantly, where does the responsibility really lie? Is it internal issues within the organization, or is it flaws with the external vendors they hire? Our mission here is to get past those surface level stats. We want to give you a solid way to think about attribution, understand the root causes, and crucially, figure out what can actually be done because, what we found is maybe a bit counterintuitive. The success or failure of an AI project, even one that leans heavily on outside partners, it seems to overwhelmingly come down to the organization itself. So let's dig in.
Yeah, it's a critical topic for pretty much anyone in business today. Whether you're leading strategy or you're on the team, actually trying to build these things, we see these huge C-suite mandates, right? Driving unbelievable investment. But at the same time, those failure rates, often cited at 80% or even higher, which is roughly double what you see for traditional IT projects.
Yeah.
It just makes you ask, why? Why this massive gap between the ambition and the actual reality on the ground? And understanding where that responsibility falls, that's really the first step to building a better strategy instead of just, throwing more money at it.
That's a great way to put it. So let's ground ourselves in those numbers first, because seeing them laid out really drives home the scale of this crisis. We're not talking minor issues here. The RAND Corporation, just in 2024, put that AI project failure rate at a really staggering 80% or more. Now, when you hear 80%, what does that tell you about how different AI is compared to, say, rolling out a new CRM system, which you said fails maybe 40% of the time?
Well, first off, that 80% isn't some outlier figure. It's actually quite consistent across the industry. You see multiple reports landing in that 70 to 80, maybe even 70 to 85% range. And some studies, they paint an even bleaker picture. There was one in 2023 that found, get this, 98% of companies had run into some kind of failure with their machine learning projects. Now, failure doesn't always mean outright cancellation, right? It's often about the inability to scale. That's just as damaging. Harvard Business Review pointed out that 90% of companies really struggle to get their AI initiatives out of the pilot phase and into full production. Despite pouring in significant money up front, they get stuck in what people are calling pilot purgatory.
Pilot purgatory. That paints a picture, doesn't it? And it feels very real. Gartner's reported similar things like, on average, only about 48% of AI projects actually make it into production. And for the newer stuff, like generative AI, Gen AI, Gartner thinks more than half of those projects fail to get deployed. Really highlights just how hard it is to go from a cool experiment to something that actually works in the business day to day. These aren't small bumps. These are projects getting shelved after a lot of time and money's been spent.
And that leads to this quite worrying trend of just abandonment. S&P Global Market Intelligence found the number of businesses scrapping most of their AI projects. It just skyrocketed, went from 17% to 42% in a single year. That same study found the average company scrapped nearly 46% of its AI proofs of concept, the bike eyes, before they ever saw the light of day. And these aren't just percentages on a page. They translate directly into massive financial losses. We're talking real impact on the bottom line, on shareholder value.
Massive is definitely the word. The documented losses across major case studies, over $20 billion. And you think about some of the really high-profile examples. IBM Watson for Oncology, right?
Yeah.
That was meant to revolutionize cancer treatment. Billions invested. But it ended up with $4 billion in documented losses because of fundamental flaws, just failing to deliver on those huge promises. Or, remember Zillow. Their big push into AI-driven home buying. That algorithmic pricing model, it led to, $304 million in write-downs, and 2,000 people lost their jobs. These aren't just little side experiments gone wrong. These were huge corporate bets that failed spectacularly, showing the massive financial risk involved.
It is such a stark contrast when you look at the money pouring in. Against this backdrop of failure, you have this just unrelenting wave of investment driven by this really powerful C-suite mandate. Leadership sees AI not just as some nice-to-have upgrade, but as absolutely fundamental for future competitiveness. McKinsey's 2024 Global Survey on AI found 72% of organizations are now using AI in at least one business function. That's up significantly from 50% in previous years. So it's not just slow growth, it's a major strategic shift.
And it looks like it's accelerating. Forrester in May 2024 found 67% of AI decision makers are planning to increase their Gen AI investment in the next year. KPMG asked that 83% of business leaders expect to increase their Gen AI spend by 50% or more. And McKinsey, again, 92% of companies plan to up their AI investments over the next 3 years. I mean, that's just a huge amount of capital flowing in. And with that comes enormous pressure to actually deliver something, right?
Oh, absolutely. This flood of money, it's a direct result of executive conviction. It's almost become a strategic imperative. A KPMG survey from 2023 found nearly three-quarters of business leaders, 74%, ranked generative AI as the single most impactful emerging tech for their business in the near term. And here's the kicker. Even though nearly half of CIOs admit their AI investments haven't met ROI expectations, which is a pretty clear red flag, the strategic mandate to keep pushing forward, it's not negotiable. So you get this weird tension. Leaders kind of know it's not delivering yet, but they feel they absolutely cannot afford to stop investing.
So how do we square this circle? Huge investment, huge failure rate. This whole dynamic seems perfectly described by Gartner's lifecycle model. A lot of our sources are saying generative AI is right now smack bang in the middle of the trough of disillusionment, which is an interesting place to be.
It really is. And that phase, as Gartner defines it, it's exactly when interest wanes as experiments and implementations fail to deliver. It usually comes right after the peak of inflated expectations, where all the early hype drives massive interest in investment, often without people fully grasping the complexities and limitations involved. So the trough of disillusionment, that's the painful collision. It's where the hype crashes into reality, and all those project failures we just talked about, that's a major symptom of being in this phase. The initial excitement just gives way to the hard truths of actually making this stuff work.
So it's where companies that maybe jumped in too fast with unrealistic hopes and not enough preparation are now dealing with stalled pilots, budgets blowing out, and not much real value to show for it. Sounds tough. But it's not the end of the road, is it? It's more like a necessary maturing process.
Exactly. It forces this fundamental shift. You have to move away from just, positive pragmatism and endless experiments towards what Gartner calls the serious work of AI scaling and value creation. Those high failure rates, while obviously painful for the companies involved, actually act as a kind of market correction. They filter out the badly planned projects and force the ones that survive to get much more strategic, much more disciplined, and really laser-focused on solving actual business problems. It's in this trough that the really hard lessons about AI implementation get learned, and that paves the way for eventually real productivity and much more realistic grasp of what AI can and can't do.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so let's dig a bit deeper into this paradoxical climate then. The fact that AI projects fail twice as often as traditional IT isn't just about the numbers being bigger. It points to something fundamentally different about AI itself, doesn't it? Traditional IT projects, like putting in a new CRM or ERP system, they're usually about implementing software with pretty well-defined deterministic functions. Success means, hitting the deadline, staying on budget, keeping the system running.
Yeah, but AI projects, they're a totally different animal. As one source put it quite nicely, AI is a data game, not a code fest. These projects are inherently probabilistic. They're not deterministic like traditional software. Their success isn't guaranteed just by writing perfect code. It hinges almost entirely on the quality, the quantity, and the relevance of the data you feed them. They are, by their very nature, experimental. They often need a lot of trial and error, constant tweaking, more of a scientific method approach. And that means the old IT project management playbooks, the ones built around rigid timelines and fixed requirements, they're just not enough. They don't fit.
So the real challenges aren't necessarily in the coding, but in things like your data strategies, statistical modeling, running experiments, getting deep alignment with the business, and increasingly handling ethical governance. And these are all areas where, frankly, most organizations just don't have mature enterprise-wide capabilities yet. And that, I guess, creates problems right from the get-go.
Precisely. And because of that, the common reaction in many companies just hand AI implementation over to the IT department is often, as our sources warn, a recipe for failure. It's basically misdiagnosing the problem. It treats this complex, strategic, data-heavy challenge as if it's purely technical. It's like asking a world-class architect to bake a wedding cake. They might be brilliant, but they don't have the right skills for that specific job. And that initial misdiagnosis just sets the project up for becoming another one of those failure statistics we talked about.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. And then you get this destructive pattern that's been called the panic and purge cycle. You've got market hype, pressure from competitors, that C-suite mandate pushing companies to invest aggressively in AI, but often they don't have a clear strategy or they haven't done the foundational work needed to actually make it happen.
And that usually leads to them kicking off just a whole bunch of disconnected pilot projects. Someone described it as chasing every AI opportunity. So they spread their resources really thin, launching dozens of small, uncoordinated efforts. And inevitably, these scattered projects just crash head-on into the organization's unpreparedness. The poor data quality, no clear way to measure ROI, cultural resistance, maybe the infrastructure isn't up to scratch.
And the outcome. Lots of failed pilots.
Yeah.
And even for the ones that look promising, they just can't seem to scale them up beyond the lab or a tiny proof of concept. So then, faced with rising costs and nothing to show for it, you get this reactive purge. Widespread cancellations, initiatives getting scrapped left and right. This whole cycle sounds incredibly wasteful. You burn through money, people lose faith in leadership's AI vision, and crucially, it stops the company from making those patient foundational investments in data, talent, governance, the stuff that's absolutely essential for any kind of long-term AI success. It feels like they're constantly restarting from scratch instead of building on lessons learned.
It is. It's a self-perpetuating cycle until you address those underlying issues. And that brings us neatly into Part 2 of our deep dive, the core problem of these internal organizational gaps. Because while the overall failure rate is alarmingly high, when you look closer, these failures aren't random. They consistently trace back to this recurring set of fundamental weaknesses inside the organization doing the implementing. The evidence just overwhelmingly points to internal factors being the primary drivers of AI project failure.
Okay, so we're getting into the why now. And it sounds like success or failure is often decided long before anyone writes code or picks a vendor. And the number one internal culprit seems to be data. The state of an organization's data foundation is its adequacy or lack thereof comes up again and again as the dominant reason AI projects fail. Garbage in, garbage out isn't just a catchy phrase here. It's like the fundamental operating principle. AI systems learn from data. If the data is bad, the system will be useless at best, maybe even harmful at worst. Our sources call data issues the Achilles heel of AI projects.
That's absolutely spot on, and the specific data problems are pretty varied and often deeply rooted in how companies operate. First, just plain poor data quality. It's everywhere, and it's critical. One survey of chief data officers found 68% blamed poor data quality for AI failures. Deloitte found 80% of AML projects hit major roadblocks because of data quality and governance issues. Another Deloitte survey, 70% of companies said low-quality data was a primary obstacle. This dirty data, full of errors, inconsistencies, missing values, it just poisons the AI models right from the start. Leads to flawed logic, unreliable predictions, basically renders the whole thing pointless.
And it's not always just poor quality, right? Sometimes it's paradoxically a lack of data or just not being able to get to the data. We live in the era of big data, but lots of organizations find they actually don't have enough of the right data for what they want to do with AI. Gartner found lack of data was a top barrier for almost 40% of people they asked. And often, the data exists somewhere, but it's locked away in different departmental silos. Totally disconnected. One report suggested, on average, maybe only 28% of a company's data is actually connected and usable for analysis. The other 72%. Stuck. Unreachable. It's like having all the ingredients for a gourmet meal, but they're scattered in locked pantries all over town, and you only have the key to one or two.
That's a perfect analogy, and it leads to another really critical, often misunderstood point of failure, not having AI-ready data. See, traditional data management, the kind you need just to run the business day to day, it's essential, but it's often not enough for AI's unique demands. As one analysis explained, AI-ready data needs to be more than just clean. It has to be fit for a specific purpose. It needs to accurately represent the real world, which, interestingly, can mean including outliers, not just cleaning them out. It needs to be dynamic, iterative, and compliant with all the changing governance and privacy rules. Most older data management systems just weren't designed for that level of complexity. So projects stall because the data simply isn't in the right shape or format for the algorithms to use effectively.
And rounding out the data issues, weak data governance. If you don't have a strong framework for managing your data, it's basically a project killer. It leads to all sorts of problems. Like, you can't trust the integrity of your data. You risk non-compliance with major regulations like GDPR, which means huge fines, potential data breaches, which are devastating for reputation, and huge ethical concerns if data gets misused or the models end up being biased. Any one of those things can completely derail an AI project and put the company at serious risk.
Okay, moving on from data, the second major area of internal failure really starts at the top. Strategic and leadership deficits. These aren't technical glitches. They're fundamental mistakes in business judgment, in planning, and in oversight. And they often doom projects right from the start. It's about setting the project up for failure, essentially.
And the most common one seems to be unclear business objectives, that whole technology-first approach, or having a cool solution in search of a problem.
Yeah.
Teams get excited about the AI tech itself, maybe its capabilities, but they lose sight of applying it to solve a specific, measurable business challenge. So you end up with projects that might be technically really interesting, maybe even cutting edge, but they don't actually deliver any business value. They don't boost revenue, cut costs, or make customers happier.
Yeah, and closely linked to that is ROI misalignment and just plain unrealistic expectations. We mentioned nearly half of CIOs say their AI investments haven't met ROI goals. That's a huge red flag for a disconnect between what's being built and what actually creates value.
Yeah.
And it often gets worse because leadership can be overconfident, have these wildly optimistic ideas about what AI can do and how fast it can do it. They expect game-changing results in like 6 months when AI often needs a much longer, more experimental runway. This impatience then leads them to pull the plug prematurely on initiatives that might have eventually paid off.
And then there's the critical role of executive sponsorship and ownership. AI projects, it seems, just can't succeed as these little grassroots efforts hidden away in one department. They absolutely need active, visible support from the top. Someone in the C-suite needs to champion it, secure the resources, push for alignment across different parts of the company. A 2024 PwC survey really highlighted this. 65% of executives admitted their AI initiatives failed specifically because they lacked that strong, visible executive backing. Without that top-level buy-in, projects just tend to wither away, starved of funds, or blocked by internal politics.
And the last point under strategic failures is something we see a lot. Siloed initiatives and a lack of cross-functional support. A really common way projects fail is when they're allowed to be driven solely by one department, often IT or maybe a dedicated AI lab. This totally ignores the reality that AI's real value comes from transforming how work gets done across different functions. If the business stakeholders, the people who will actually use the AI or whose processes will change, aren't co-owners right from the beginning, the result is often a solution that's technically okay, but operationally irrelevant. It doesn't fit how people actually work, or it solves a problem nobody in the business really prioritized, leads to misaligned goals, and ultimately a tool nobody uses no matter how clever the tech is.
It's so clear AI isn't just an IT challenge. It's fundamentally an organizational one. Needs deep involvement everywhere. Which brings us nicely to the third big pillar of internal failure, the human factor. Organizations seem to consistently underestimate the people side of AI. They focus so much on the technology itself, but neglect the talent, the culture, the critical change management needed for success.
And that oversight is a major reason projects fail to get adopted and deliver real value. The biggest human factor issue, probably the ongoing lack of internal expertise and skills. A 2024 KPMG survey found technical skills gaps were the #1 barrier to deploying AI agents, cited by almost 60% of leaders. McKinsey backs this up, finding 58% of businesses are held back by AI skill shortages. And importantly, it's not just about needing more elite data scientists, it's also about a lack of AI literacy. Among business leaders, they often don't know enough to properly evaluate or approve models, and among the end users themselves. Think about it. An end user's ability to interact effectively with an AI tool, maybe through skilled prompting. That's directly tied to the value you get out of it. If your sales team can't ask the AI the right questions to get useful lead insights, how good the model is doesn't really matter.
That's such a great point about prompting. Really shows how the human interaction directly impacts the tech's performance. But it's not just skills, is it? There's also cultural resistance, a lack of trust. Rolling out AI isn't just a tech deployment, it's a massive cultural shift. People often resist because they're scared of losing their jobs, they're skeptical about whether the AI is reliable, or they just don't trust what these new tools mean for their work. A 2023 survey found over half of people, 52%, were more concerned than excited about AI. That's up sharply from 37% just a couple of years earlier. And as one NTT data report warned, if employees don't trust a tool, they won't just ignore it. They might actively work against it. They'll find workarounds, stick to the old ways, effectively sabotaging the whole thing.
And that leads directly to the next point, insufficient change management. The real payoff from AI comes when you fundamentally change how work gets done, not just automate a few tasks here and there. Yet companies consistently underinvest in the change management needed to prepare people for these new ways of working. A BCG analysis found that the leading companies, they allocate resources something like 70-20-10. 70% goes to people and processes training, workflow redesign, communication, 20% to the tech, and data, and only 10% to the actual AI algorithms. But lagging companies, they often flip that completely, pouring 70% into the tech and neglecting the people. This failure to proactively manage the human side, redesign workflows, support people through the transition, it's a critical, common mistake that stalls or kills AI projects.
Okay, so we've got data problems, strategic blunders, and major human factor challenges. That's already a pretty heavy list. What else makes the list of internal issues that consistently derail these projects?
Well, the final piece of the internal puzzle is that many AI projects fail simply because they're built on inadequate technical and operational infrastructure. You can have a brilliant strategy, a talented team, but if your underlying systems can't handle the unique demands of AI development and deployment, the whole thing is going to struggle.
Right, inadequate core infrastructure. A lot of companies just aren't technically ready for prime-time AI. As one analysis put it quite bluntly, many have underspent on IT for so long that their IT systems and data are not ready for AI. So maybe they lack the heavy-duty computing power needed to manage truly massive data sets, or to train those complex models that need huge processing capabilities, or maybe they can't deploy them in a way that's stable and scalable enough to handle thousands of real users.
Right.
This directly undermines the project, right? Forces expensive re-architecting or just leads to cancellation.
Then you've got pervasive integration challenges. AI tools don't live in isolation. They have to connect seamlessly with everything else the business uses: the CRM, the ERP system, legacy databases, communication platforms. And this integration piece is a major hurdle. A Gartner survey found 55% of leaders cite integration with existing tech as a big challenge. Projects often fail because the AI solution doesn't integrate well with actual business processes. It ends up being this isolated thing, maybe delivering some value at a controlled test, but unable to impact core operations where it really counts.
And this often leads straight back to that pilot purgatory, the inability to scale beyond the proof of concept stage. So many AI projects seem to die right there, in that gap between the lab and the real world. The controlled environment of a POC, often using limited data, can hide a lot of real-world problems, like the huge variability you get in production data, the complexity of integrating with live systems under load, the sheer computing resources needed to run a model at enterprise scale. Organizations often just fail to plan for that critical transition. They underestimate the resources, the effort involved. And as a result, Gartner thinks at least 30% of Gen AI projects get abandoned after the POC stage. They never actually make it into production use.
Now, if we dig just a little deeper into these internal failures, a couple more nuanced things emerge that are really critical. First, that widely reported lack of skilled talent. It's often a bit of a misdiagnosis. The real issue isn't just a shortage of elite AI PhDs, but rather a lopsided, unbalanced talent strategy. Companies tend to focus heavily on recruiting that small group of very specialized data scientists, which, yes, you absolutely need. But focusing only there creates this huge gap because they neglect to build broad AI literacy across the rest of the workforce.
That makes total sense. So you might have business managers who don't understand AI well enough to even evaluate what a model is telling them, or end users who can't get the full value because they haven't been trained how to interact with the tool properly. And that lack of trust we talked about among employees, it breeds fear, resistance, people consciously or unconsciously undermining the new systems. So the failure happens in that gap between the AI specialists and everyone else. A successful strategy needs what people call a T-shaped workforce, deep specialists working together with a broad base of employees who have foundational AI literacy. Ignoring that wide horizontal part of the T, the broad literacy that seems to be the real talent-related root cause of failure.
And secondly, those problems of data issues and strategic misalignment. We shouldn't really see them as separate things. They're fundamentally intertwined, two sides of the same coin, really. A lack of strategic clarity is often a direct cause of data chaos. Think about it. If leadership kicks off an AI project driven by hype or just a vague desire to do AI, but they fail to define a specific, measurable business problem they're trying to solve, then the data requirements become completely ambiguous.
Right, so if a sales VP says, we need AI to boost sales, but can't specify how or that's part of the sales process, the data science team has no clear direction. What data is relevant? What quality level do we need? What should we prioritize collecting or cleaning? That ambiguity leads either to trying to boil the ocean, wasting time cleaning all the data, or just grabbing whatever data set is easiest to get, which probably isn't suitable for actually solving any meaningful problem. Then the model built on that messy or irrelevant data fails to solve the still undefined problem, which just reinforces leadership's view that AI isn't delivering value, leading to cancellation. Sounds like a classic vicious cycle.
It absolutely is, and it reveals something quite profound. An organization's data quality isn't just a technical issue for IT to fix. It's a direct reflection of its strategic clarity. A well-defined business objective is probably the most powerful data governance tool you can have, because it gives you that essential filter, that focus for everything that follows: data prep, management, modeling. Knowing what problem you're trying to solve tells you exactly what data you need and to what standard.
Fascinating. Okay, so the internal challenges are clearly massive, the lion's share of the problem. But let's pivot now and look at the external partner, the vendor. While the evidence points strongly inward, we can't just ignore the role of the vendor. Deciding to buy AI capabilities instead of building them introduces a whole new layer of complexity and risk that needs careful handling.
Absolutely. Partnering with an AI vendor can be hugely beneficial. It can give you access to cutting-edge tech, specialized skills that would be incredibly hard or costly to develop yourself. But it definitely creates new dependencies and risks too. And that decision, selecting the right vendor, is one of the most crucial steps in the whole project lifecycle, but it's often done without enough rigor. Our sources really stress this mindset shift. You need to look for a long-term strategic partner, not just a transactional supplier. And poor vendor selection, often driven by slick marketing or just picking the cheapest option, is explicitly called out as a direct cause of project failure.
So it's not just about what they claim they can do, but how well they actually align with your long-term strategy and your day-to-day operational realities. Which means the due diligence process has to go way beyond the sales pitch and the flashy demo. It needs a really deep, comprehensive evaluation, looking at things that often get overlooked. First, obviously, technical and integration capability. Is their platform genuinely compatible with your existing tech stack? Can it talk seamlessly to your legacy systems, your data stores, or CRM? You've got to really scrutinize the APIs, the SDKs, the customization options to make sure it won't just be this isolated piece of tech.
Then there's model transparency and data provenance. You absolutely have to demand clarity on where their AI model comes from. Is it proprietary, open source, licensed? This is crucial for assessing risks around accuracy, performance, potential IP infringement. And beyond that, the vendor needs to be upfront about what data the model was trained on. Using public data scraped from the web, for instance, can bring huge legal and ethical headaches that you, the client, could end up being liable for.
And today, data privacy, security, governance, these are just table stakes, non-negotiable. The due diligence has to hammer down on how the vendor protects data privacy, how they tackle bias in their models, how they guarantee your proprietary data isn't used to train their general models for other clients, and how they comply with regulations like GDPR or the upcoming EU AI Act. This is where you field your company from massive legal and reputational hits.
And finally, you've got to assess scalability and long-term support. A solution that works great in a small pilot with a few users might just fall over completely when you try to roll it out enterprise-wide with thousands of users hitting it constantly with huge amounts of data. The vendor has to prove they have robust, scalable infrastructure, and just as important is their commitment to ongoing support, maintenance, updates, training for your people, help with change management that goes way beyond just getting it installed. You're not just buying software. You're essentially entering a long-term relationship.
Okay, so even with all those checks, things can still go wrong, where the vendor's tech or practices directly cause problems. We have some documented cases that offer really valuable lessons here, like McDonald's and IBM with that AI drive-through system. McDonald's pulled the plug on that high-profile partnership, reportedly because the tech just couldn't reliably handle the messy reality of a drive-through, all the different accents, background noise, people changing their minds mid-order. It seems like a classic case of claimed capability in the lab, just not translating to real-world performance.
Another one that got a lot of attention involved Air Canada's customer service chatbot. Back in February 2024, Air Canada was actually held legally liable. They had to compensate a customer because the chatbot gave wrong information about bereavement fares. The court basically said the airline hadn't taken reasonable precautions to ensure the AI's accuracy. This case is huge because it clearly shows you can't just blame the vendor. The organization using the AI is ultimately responsible for its outputs.
And we really can't discuss major AI failures without bringing up IBM Watson for Oncology again. That multi-billion-dollar effort meant to transform cancer care. It failed spectacularly. Reports surfaced of it giving unsafe, incorrect treatment advice. And the root cause: a catastrophic flaw in IBM's development strategy. The model was trained mostly on synthetic, hypothetical patient cases, not on diverse, real-world patient data from multiple hospitals. It was fundamentally disconnected from actual clinical practice, a failure of the vendor's internal data strategy that led to dangerously bad outputs.
And of course, there's Amazon's bias recruiting tool. Now, they built that internally, but it's become the classic example of the inherent bias risk in any AI solution, whether you build it or buy it. They had to scrap it because it systematically discriminated against female candidates. Why? Because it learned from a decade of Amazon's own historical resume data, which reflected past hiring practices that favored men. The AI just amplified the existing human bias in the data, inadvertently screening out qualified women. It really highlights how easily bias lurking in your historical data can get baked right into an AI system.
These examples clearly show the vendor's direct impact, but there's also a subtler risk, sometimes called the outsourcing dilemma. It's about expertise versus abdication. It happens when a company sees a vendor not as a partner to boost internal skills, but as a way to just hand off responsibility, especially for understanding their own business context.
Yeah, a common trap is outsourcing to a vendor who's technically really sharp, but knows next to nothing about the client's specific industry. There's a great story from a data scientist on Reddit about a big AI project failing precisely because the outsourced firm had zero clue about the client's niche industry. The client's own team could see immediately the model's outputs were just nonsensical. But the vendor's data scientists, brilliant as they were technically, lacked the business context to even understand why it was wrong. They were building something technically complex but practically useless. The client knew what they needed but couldn't translate the why effectively to the vendor.
And there's an even deeper risk here, something a Forbes article called the cognitive delegation dilemma. As these powerful, easy-to-use AI tools come from vendors, they might actually hollow out the critical thinking and strategic reasoning skills inside the client company. When AI handles the complex stuff, people, employees, and leaders might stop engaging in that effort that powers strategic thought. You end up outsourcing not just the task, but the actual cognitive struggle with ambiguity and complexity. You lose that cognitive muscle memory and become less resilient, less innovative over time. It's like always using GPS and eventually completely losing your own sense of direction.
Now, if you analyze the vendor's role a bit more deeply, you find that even when a vendor's product seems to be the direct cause of failure, the ultimate accountability often still rests with the client. Most significant vendor-related failures aren't usually down to simple technical bugs. They're fundamentally failures of translation.
The translation gap, that's a really powerful concept. So value gets lost in that space between the vendor's general tech and the client's specific, messy, unique business reality. The vendor fails to translate their general capabilities accurately into the client's specific operational environment. And at the same time, maybe even more critically, the client often fails to translate their complex business needs into clear, specific, testable requirements for the vendor.
It's exactly right, that McDonald's and IBM case. It wasn't really a failure of voice recognition technology itself in a quiet lab. It was a failure to translate that tech effectively to a noisy, unpredictable drive-through with endless variations. Watson for Oncology. A catastrophic failure to translate a model trained on fake data into the complex reality of treating diverse, actual patients. This translation gap is really a shared space of responsibility, and it implies that the most vital skill for any organization working with an AI vendor is having this kind of organizational bilingualism. You need people internally who can speak both the language of business strategy and the language of data science. Companies that lack that internal translation ability, that can't bridge that gap, they're almost certainly set up to fail, regardless of how good the vendor might technically be.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, maybe even counterintuitive. The fact that powerful pre-built foundation models are now increasingly available from vendors, this paradoxically makes internal expertise more important, not less. Can you unpack that? It feels like ready-made solutions should demand less internal skill, not more.
It absolutely does seem counterintuitive, but it's true. Think back. In the past, if you wanted sophisticated AI, you often had to build the core model yourself, from scratch. That required a big, deep internal tech team. But today, with powerful foundation models from OpenAI, Google, Anthropic, and others available essentially as a service, the main challenge for companies is shifting. It's moving away from building the core model and towards selecting the right one, integrating it smoothly, governing its use properly, fine-tuning it with your own proprietary data, and adapting it for your very specific business needs. As one analysis pointed out, the easy availability of these models means companies can, and probably should, shift their focus to build an AI-ready data foundation rather than on the models themselves.
So it's kind of like if someone hands you a super high-performance car engine, that's great, but you still need the expertise to install it correctly in your specific car, hook up all the fuel lines and electronics, and then know how to maintain it for the way you drive. The engine itself is amazing, but it's the ecosystem around it that makes it actually work optimally.
which puts a huge premium on all those internal capabilities we talked about earlier, doesn't it? Like strong data governance, clear strategy, workflow redesign, serious change management, and a broadly skilled workforce.
Precisely. So that old buy versus build debate, it's becoming a false choice.
Yeah.
The winning model now seems to be buy and build. You buy the core engine, the foundational model, from a specialized vendor, and then you build the mature internal ecosystem, the data pipelines, the strategy, the talent, the governance needed to harness its power effectively and safely within your unique business context. Companies that try to use vendor solutions as a shortcut to bypass that hard internal work, they're just setting themselves up for failure because they lack the internal muscle to actually integrate and leverage the technology properly. This brings us right to a crucial part of this deep dive: actually attributing responsibility. If we want to figure out how to assign blame for AI project failures, we need a more structured way to think about it. We're going to borrow some ideas from attribution theory, which comes from social psychology.
Right. Attribution theory helps explain how we interpret events and decide what caused them. Two concepts are really useful here: locus of control and controllability. Locus of control is about whether we see the cause as coming from inside the organization, an internal locus, or from the outside environment, an external locus. So saying our team wasn't skilled enough is internal. Saying the vendor's product was flawed is external.
And controllability is about the degree to which the cause was something someone could have actually managed or prevented. We tend to assign blame to whoever had direct control over the thing that failed. So combining these, the critical question isn't just what went wrong, it's who had control over the factors that led to this failure. That's where the real accountability often lies.
And when you run all those common failure causes we discussed through that lens, the argument for internal attribution becomes incredibly strong. The vast majority of reasons AI projects fail are not only internal to the organization, but they're also things the organization has a high degree of control over.
Let's take data issues. That's unambiguous, right? Data quality, governance, accessibility, readiness, that's all squarely internal and controllable. The company owns its data, its architecture, its processes. A failure there is fundamentally an internal failure of management and strategy.
Exactly. Same for strategic and leadership issues. Setting clear business goals, linking projects to ROI, providing active executive sponsorship, ensuring cross-functional teamwork. These are all core leadership responsibilities. Entirely internal, entirely controllable. If a project fails because the strategy was vague or leadership wasn't bought in, that's a purely internal leadership failure.
And the human factor stuff, like the overall talent strategy, the company culture, the approach to change management, those are all distinctly internal domains too. Sure, external markets affect hiring, but the core decision to invest in upskilling your people, foster trust, proactively manage the human impact, that's entirely within the organization's control. These aren't outside pressures forcing failure, they're internal choices.
Now here's where it gets nuanced. Vendor management failures. At first glance, if a vendor's product is buggy or doesn't perform, it seems like an obvious external cause. But apply the principle of controllability. The real issue isn't just that the vendor's product had a flaw. It's that the client organization failed to control for that possibility through its own robust internal processes. The whole process of managing vendor risk, that is, fundamentally an internal process.
Okay, so the organization controls how rigorous its due diligence is. It controls how clearly it defines requirements and KPIs for the vendor. It controls how it structures POC testing to validate claims using its own data. It controls the contractual protections and SLAs it negotiates. So failing to vet a vendor properly, or define needs clearly, or test adequately, or get strong contract terms, that's a failure of an internal, controllable process. The locus of control for managing external risk actually sits inside the organization. The root cause isn't the external event, like a bad vendor, but the internal process failure that let that external event cause harm.
So when can we genuinely blame a failure purely on external, uncontrollable vendor factors? It's a really narrow window, a tiny fraction of cases. Our sources talk about black swan event scenarios where even a diligent, mature organization couldn't reasonably have seen the risk coming or prevented it, no matter how good their internal processes were.
What would that look like? Maybe a vendor deliberately lying about capabilities in a way that's impossible to detect through due diligence. Or a vendor that seemed financially solid suddenly going bankrupt without warning. Or maybe a massive undisclosed security breach on the vendor side that they actively concealed. These things can happen, but they're truly rare. They absolutely do not represent the typical reasons why AI projects fail day to day.
So pulling this all together, what's the big picture attribution? Our analysis, synthesizing a lot of research and the points we've covered, leads to a pretty stark quantitative model. Now, this isn't from one single survey, but it's an analytical model based on the weight of the evidence.
And it suggests that a massive 75 to 85% of AI project failures are primarily attributable to internal organizational factors. This huge chunk comes directly from the organization's own shortcomings. Weak data foundations, fuzzy strategy, critical talent gaps, cultural resistance, poor change management, inadequate infrastructure, all things the organization has direct control over. Improving these internal areas offers the biggest leverage for success.
Then another 10 to 20% of failures can be attributed to the internal management of the vendor lifecycle. This covers cases where, yes, a vendor's product might have been the immediate problem, but the root cause was the client's failure in controllable internal processes, like skimping on due diligence, setting vague requirements, not testing thoroughly, or poor ongoing vendor oversight.
Which leaves fewer than 5% of failures attributable purely to uncontrollable external vendor-side issues. Those really rare black swan events we mentioned, where the organization genuinely couldn't have foreseen or mitigated the risk.
So the powerful takeaway is this. Over 95% of AI project failures have their root cause in factors that are ultimately internal to and controllable by the organization doing the implementation. The locus of control for success or failure, it's overwhelmingly internal. And that's actually an incredibly empowering message, isn't it? It means companies aren't just victims of complex tech or flaky vendors. They have the power, the agency, to dramatically boost their success rate through internal development and discipline.
Which brings us perfectly to our final section. Forging a path to success with some strategic recommendations. If AI success is overwhelmingly an internal game, then the most vital place for immediate, sustained investment has to be the organization's data foundation. You just can't win at AI without getting your data house in order.
Yeah, the core recommendation here is to formally shift the company's mindset from being model-centric to being data-centric in its AI strategy. That means treating data not just as some operational exhaust or a tech chore, but as a core strategic asset. Like a product in its own right, something you design, manage, and constantly improve. Actionable steps. Invest seriously in AI-ready data management. Go beyond just basic data quality. Focus on making sure data is truly fit for the specific AI purpose, that it represents the real world accurately, that it's dynamic and fully compliant. This often means investing in modern metadata management and data governance tools that help you actually understand, track, and control your data's lineage and suitability for AI.
And companies absolutely have to break down those data silos that cripple so many efforts. This needs real executive backing, a concerted push to invest in modern data architectures, things like a data fabric or a data mesh. Think of a data fabric as this flexible layer that connects all your different data sources, makes them accessible, and governs them without necessarily having to move everything into one giant lake. A data mesh kind of decentralizes ownership, treating data domains as products owned by specific teams. But the goal for both is the same. Make all relevant enterprise data securely and reliably available for AI, no matter where it physically lives. And absolutely key to this is establishing clear data ownership and stewardship. You need clear accountability for the quality, governance, and strategic use of critical data across the business.
Okay, beyond data, strong leadership is the real catalyst. It's what turns tech potential into actual business value. Leaders have to get past just chasing the hype and build a culture of strategic, disciplined AI execution. The recommendation: anchor every single AI project in a specific, measurable business problem, and then lead the cultural change needed to actually get it adopted.
Practically, that means mandating a business-first approach. Just forbid launching any AI project that doesn't start with a clear business problem and a plausible, quantifiable path to ROI. Use a systematic framework to evaluate and prioritize use cases, making sure they truly align with top-level business goals. Also, enforce cross-functional ownership. Stop siloing AI projects. Mandate that every major initiative is co-owned, co-led by both business and technical stakeholders right from day one. This ensures everyone's aligned, fosters shared accountability, and helps build solutions that are technically sound and actually meet real-world operational needs.
And crucially, invest aggressively in AI literacy and change management. Recognize that the people and process side is often more critical than the algorithms. Roll out broad AI literacy programs. Demystify the tech for everyone from the C-suite needing to grasp strategic implications, down to frontline staff who will use the tools daily. For every dollar you spend on the AI tech, you need to invest a proportional amount in redesigning workflows, providing thorough training, and communicating constantly to build trust, manage fear, and drive enthusiastic adoption. This proactive investment in the human side is what really separates the winners.
Finally, when you do bring in external partners, you need to evolve how you manage them. Move from just procurement to strategic partnership management. This demands a whole new level of rigor and internal skill in handling those external relationships. Treat selecting and managing an AI vendor with the same seriousness and diligence you'd apply to a major merger or acquisition. The potential impact, positive or negative, can be just as big.
So that means implementing a really comprehensive due diligence framework. Don't just rely on vendor promises or surface checks. Use a structured approach to scrutinize them across all the critical dimensions we discussed. Check their business and strategic alignment. Do they really understand your industry and context? Scrutinize the tech and the model. How does it work? What are its limits? Where did the training data come from? Vet their data governance and ethics. Are they robust, aligned with your values? Evaluate their integration and scalability. Can they fit into your environment and grow with you? And thoroughly review the legal and commercial terms, IP ownership, liability, pricing structure.
And it means mandating measurable, data-driven proofs of concept. Don't fall for the slick demo. Insist on structured PPCs that test the vendor's claims using your data against your real use cases with clear, pre-agreed KPIs tied directly to business value. This gives you an objective comparison and validates claims before you commit big money. And vital to making all this work is cultivating that internal bilingual talent we talked about. You need people who can bridge the gap between business teams and the vendor, fluent in both strategy and data science. They're essential for translating needs accurately and critically evaluating vendor solutions that might look good on paper but wouldn't work in practice.
What's really fascinating now is seeing how these recommendations are actually playing out in the market through emerging trends. Companies are definitely moving towards more sophisticated hybrid models, not just pure build or pure buy. We saw that dramatic shift mentioned earlier from 80% vendor reliance in 2023 down to a more balanced 50-50 build-buy approach in 2024. That's not just flipping a switch. It shows companies are adopting these nuanced hybrid strategies. They're focusing internal efforts on core business logic, the stuff that makes them unique, while strategically using vendors for foundational infrastructure or specialized AI tools.
That makes complete sense. Buy the engine, build the custom car around it. And we're seeing specific hybrid models becoming dominant, right? Things like strategic AI solutions partnerships, deep long-term co-innovation with vendors, platform partnerships leveraging AI platforms from major cloud providers, and using consulting and implementation services to bring in specialist expertise for specific projects. And technically, too, hybrid architectures are winning out. Like retrieval augmented generation, RAG combining internal data with external models, that shot up to 51% adoption. Companies are also using multi-model strategies, maybe routing tasks to different foundation models based on the need.
And you see this working effectively across industries. Law firms using AI for initial research, then human lawyers for the verification and nuance analysis. Healthcare, using AI ambient scribes to draft notes during appointments, but with human clinicians reviewing and signing off. Manufacturing using AI for defect detection on the line, but routing flagged items to human inspectors for the final call, keeping quality high while boosting efficiency.
The talent landscape is shifting dramatically, too, to support all this. Almost 1 in 3 jobs apparently now requires AI skills. That's a huge jump from early 2024. And companies are paying big premiums, like 2-3x salary bumps for AI-savvy enterprise architects. It highlights this huge need for reskilling existing workforces globally. Org structures are changing, too. CEO oversight of AI governance is way up. More dedicated AI ethics and compliance roles. And companies are often centralizing AI deployment risk through centers of excellence while still using hybrid models for actual development.
And driving all these shifts, a relentless focus on ROI. Yes, enterprise AI spending exploded 6-fold from 2023 to 2024, up to nearly $14 billion. But the payoff is starting to show. Average ROI hitting $3.70 for every dollar spent on Gen AI, with the top performers getting over $10 back. And tellingly, ROI and measurable value, now the #1 factor in vendor selection, cited by 30%. Price. Surprisingly, it's the lowest priority at just 1%. That's a massive shift. It shows companies are demanding tangible results, strategic outcomes, not just cheap experiments.
So let's wrap this up. The story of AI in business today is clearly one of major contradiction. You've got this incredibly important technology and massive investment, but also this stubbornly high failure rate. But our deep dive today leads to a pretty clear and actually quite empowering conclusion. Whether an AI project succeeds or fails is overwhelmingly decided by the internal maturity of the organization trying to implement it.
Right. It's easy for leaders to point fingers outward, blame a vendor, blame the complexity of AI itself. But that's mostly misreading the situation. Our attribution model suggests 75–85% of failures stem directly from internal weaknesses in data, strategy, talent, infrastructure. Another 10–20% come from failing to properly manage the vendor relationship, which is also an internal process failure. That leaves maybe less than 5% genuinely attributable to purely external uncontrollable factors.
And that sends a really strong message to business leaders. The road to AI success doesn't involve finding some magical silver bullet technology, and you can't just outsource the problem away. It's paved by doing the hard foundational work internally. Building an organization that's truly ready for AI. That means getting disciplined about data, anchoring everything in real business value, investing broadly in AI literacy and change management, and developing the strategic muscle to manage vendors as true partners.
The locus of control for AI outcomes, it's internal. So the responsibility, but also the huge opportunity to turn things around, rests squarely with the organization's leadership.
And that leaves us with a final thought for you, our listener, to chew on. The path to AI success isn't about finding that perfect tech or vendor silver bullet. It's about building the internal organizational muscle, the data discipline, the strategic clarity, the human readiness, the robust governance needed to effectively wield this transformative power. So the question is, what internal muscles might your organization need to develop or strengthen to truly unlock AI's potential?
It's a question that really demands some honest reflection and then decisive action. Because the future of AI success, it really does lie within.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We hope this is giving you a clearer framework for thinking about why AI projects succeed and, maybe more importantly, why they so often don't.